I think a successful shlichut would be a shlichut where the shaliach is no longer needed because there is that local leadership, people who can do education by themselves. The community is strong enough that they don't need that outside reinforcement to be permanent. Like they can always, every community brings guest lecturers and does extra things. But ideally, I think a successful shaliach would be one that after him, the community doesn't need him anymore.
This is Women's Gallery, the podcast where we showcase women defining Jewish leadership today. My name's Joanne Greenaway, and each episode I interview one incredible female leader making a mark in her own way on the Jewish community. We explore different models of leadership in the context of schools, shuls, universities, batei din, and more. And this week we're going to be focusing on communities, and specifically communities across Europe, some of the smaller communities. And I am delighted to have with me my good friend, who I've got to know recently through some of the work I've been doing in Europe. Her name is Danielle Chaimovitz. She is a Jewish educator and community builder with over a decade of experience working with small Jewish communities across Europe, Latin America, Australia, and North America. She speaks Hebrew, English, and Spanish. And her work really focuses on empowering Jewish women in leadership, supporting young families and parents, and revitalizing Jewish life in communities where resources are often limited. She has lived recently in Poland, in Estonia, and in Germany, where she is now. In Poland, she served as Rebbetzin educator and lecturer. In Estonia, she led community programming and education at the JCC in Tallinn. And she's been working with the Conference for European Rabbis, looking after their Rebbetzins. She is passionate about leadership, education, and also about Jewish food as a bridge to tradition and identity, and really brings a multicultural perspective and a unique personality to the wonderful work she does. Danielle, welcome to Women's Gallery.
It's so good to be here.
I'm so happy to have you. And for me, it's important partly to introduce you to our listeners and to the world, but also because it's important for me to focus on Europe and on some of the communities that we don't often hear about, because I think we're all guilty of sometimes thinking the Jewish world is all about Israel, America, and sometimes the UK too. But there is so much else going on, and so much beauty and diversity and complexity in many of the other communities that you have got to know really intimately. So I am fascinated by the role of shlucha, which is the female of shaliach, and many of us know shlichim through Chabad and the wonderful work they do. But I really would love to hear what it means to you. And in your work, where currently you're living in Munich, previously you were in Tallinn, Estonia, before that in Wrocław in Poland. Originally you're from Jerusalem, right? But you've chosen this life, and I would love you to tell us what it means to you.
Wow. So I really think it's such for me, shlichut is really my calling. Like, it sounds very corny, but since I was very young, I found myself on all these short-term delegations and shlichuyot in small Jewish communities, or, representing my city, my youth movement, and so on. And I really feel that it's a really good way for me to fulfill my purpose. And it's really, shlichut is me to be sent by something, by someone. So I did my shlichut through the Jewish Agency, the World Zionist Organization, different organizations that see the importance of keeping that connection alive, whether it is Israel and I don't like the word diaspora Jews, but between Israel and Jewish communities, different Jewish communities. And I think on that route, since I was 16 on my first youth delegation, I feel like it also helped me define who I am as a Jew. And that's why I was always so intrigued and drawn towards this professional path of working with Jewish communities and with Jews who don't live in Israel.
I think people often think about shlichut through the work of Chabad. And I'm interested for you to define your work in terms of how you would compare the kind of shlichut that you've undertaken to the role of Chabad, who we know from the work around the world. And particularly, I suppose, we think often as shlichim as a couple. So do you see this work as you as a Jewish woman, or is this you alongside your husband? How does that work?
Wow. Okay. So I think, first of all, I think of it as a family shlichut. It's not just me and my husband. We also have children who didn't choose this life of shlichut, and there's some prices to pay with that. But I think the main difference I feel that we have between us and Chabad would be that Chabad moved to a community and they stay there. And shlichut, the way that the Jewish Agency and the World Zionist Organization, the way they look at it is that shlichut is something that has a begin date and an end date. And so I also see it similarly, that we come to community, we do the best that we can, and we can talk more about what it does it mean to do the best that you can for a community, but it's not forever. Like, I think a successful shlichut would be a shlichut where the shaliach is no longer needed because there is that local leadership, people who can do education by themselves. The community is strong enough that they don't need that outside reinforcement to be permanent. Like, they can always, every community brings guest lecturers and does extra things. But ideally, I think a successful shaliach would be one that after him, the community doesn't need him anymore.
It's interesting because often in the work in Europe, people ask this question about when you're not needed anymore and whether actually your role is to strengthen the community or to accept that sometimes a community is small and that people should be encouraged to go to a bigger community where there's more infrastructure or even to make aliyah. So I know people have challenged me a lot in the work that I've done in Europe, where the community is sometimes under 1,000 people, to say, is this going to last? Is this sustainable? And, shouldn't the objective actually be to encourage those who are strong in their identity to go elsewhere?
As someone who lived in a very small Jewish community in Poland, we had 300 members.
Wow.
And a lot of people, and in Poland has a very complicated history, not just the Holocaust, but everything that happened after. And because we didn't live in Warsaw, and Warsaw was a more established community, so we really, the more we got to know the members of the community, we really noticed that a lot of people either left to Warsaw or to the States or to Israel, to London, where they felt that they have that infrastructure. And I think if it's caught in the right time, then the community can take actions to keep people where they are. Of course, it's not always possible. Like, there's cost of living and professional opportunities that people want. And even just, you meet someone who lives in another city and you marry them. But I think it's really sad for me because I remember I heard a lot of older people when we lived in Poland said, but our community, it's a lost cause. That it doesn't have to be this way. And we really felt that a lot of things that are necessary for a Jewish community to sustain itself, we were able to establish, to create, and to even raise the funds, not us, but with collaboration with other people, but like to renovate a mikveh from 150 years ago, to really make it possible for every Jew that wants to live there to really have what they need and not to have to go elsewhere.
I guess there's a tension, though, really between the goal of Aliyah, which is as a Jewish ideal, and the goal of preserving these unique cultures in the communities that we have that are so precious, and so many of them are dying out.
Yeah.
I don't know how we reconcile that, if we do, or we give it to people to choose. Those who want to go, that's a goal, and those who want to stay, we're there to strengthen them.
And I think it's a tension because also in the last 5 years, we've seen a pandemic, which made people reconsider their priorities. We've seen the war in Ukraine that also made people leave. And a lot of Jewish communities all of a sudden had a breath of fresh air and people coming in and needing these community services. And with October 7th, that also sent a lot of Israelis to consider where they want to live and where they want to raise their children, or Jews who lived in the same place their whole life. And after October 7th, say, I need this. I want to be a Jew, and what does it mean and where do I go? And so it fluctuates.
Yeah, it's really fascinating, actually, that the whole Israeli influx into Europe and what that means for European Jewry and how the European communities are integrating or not integrating Israelis. It really has raised a whole lot of questions, but I think it's a big question in terms of what global Jewry looks like and the whole ecosystem of where people want to live and how we're all like there to support each other rather than moving in one direction, us supporting Israel or us sending people to Israel. And I think as a result, Israelis have also gotten to understand European Jewry better and appreciate the diaspora more. And that conversation has like really started in a way that it wasn't active before.
Absolutely.
Okay, so let me go back to you, because as I say, I'm really fascinated by this decision that you've made and this sense of mission. There's such a strong sense of mission that you have. Was there a moment? Was there part of your upbringing, or was there something in your story that was a kind of turning point when you realized that this was the kind of leadership that you wanted to get into, or the lifestyle that you wanted to choose? Because it's a career and it's also a lifestyle, right?
Yeah. And I didn't know at the time that this could be a career. The world has changed a lot in the last few decades. But I think, like I told you, that I started quite young with these encounters with Jews who live outside of Israel. And I felt that this made me a better Jew, to see things differently. I grew up in the Bet Knesset Agadol in Jerusalem, which is very specific.
Mm-hmm.
And, you know, to go to places who do things differently and their Jewish experience is different, I was really drawn to that. And
The Bet
because,
Knesset HaGadol, I should say, for those who know it more as a tourist, is the Great Synagogue, which is right in the center of town, right? King George Street, is it? In the center of town. And it's not normally known as a community that Israelis are part of. But I guess it's quite a unique experience to grow up there and you see people from around the world.
you see people from around the world, but you see a very specific way of Jewish life. And I think going outside of Israel presented me of different ways, of different kinds of communities. And then I started exploring other shuls in Achlaot, in other areas of Jerusalem that have a completely different experience. And I think that's what kind of got me started. But it sounds very selfish. This life of shlichut gives me a sense of purpose and a sense of really believing in what I'm doing and feeling that I make a difference. I don't think there's a lot of jobs in your life that you really feel like you are making an impact and you are doing something that is for the greater good. And it also makes you feel great about yourself, and you can get paid for it. Not always, not a lot, but you know, it's a combination of these things that I didn't know it at the time. I think only when we moved to Poland, I really started saying, wow, this is really my career path. How do I develop it? How do I evolve with it? And I don't look at myself as just a madricha. You know, as someone, you know, when you're young, it's easy to think of yourself as an older madricha or still in formal education. But with the world evolving and with the choices that me and my husband made together, it really became something that not only I enjoy and fulfills me, but I think I'm good at and I'm able to make a good contribution.
For sure you are. And I guess it's a decision you make together with your husband, that he's also on the same kind of path. And then you decide to get married, you decide you want to look for jobs together. And then is it through the Jewish agency? They place you somewhere, or you get to choose where you want to go? How does that work?
So our path was really different. If you would have asked my husband before he met me, he didn't have a passport. He never left Israel. He was a very, very Israeli 8th generation in Jerusalem, complete opposite from me, that I was born to olim. And I think together, through when we got married and we started hosting, you know, my chanichim from Australia, from South America, he was finally, you know, growing up in the old city, he would see Jewish tourists all the time. But that was the first time he really sat down and spoke with someone whose Jewish upbringing was so different to his. And to understand why people choose to live outside of Israel, why people choose to stay outside of Israel, how can you really be a complete Jew when you live outside of Israel? That opened his horizons. And then the opportunity to move to Poland came, and it took us a long time to say yes. But it really helped us transform also who we are. You know, those were the shaping years of us as a family. But the moving to Poland was not a plan. We actually went to help that Jewish community for Pesach. And we thought, you know, an experience, why not? But the connection with that community was so strong that we went back for the Chagim afterwards. And after that, the community said, we want you to come and be our rabbi in Rebbetzin. And that completely changed our track, because it was not something we knew. We wanted to do shlichut one day somewhere. We probably would have wanted a place that people can pronounce their name and has a regular minyan and a Jewish school and a lot of things that we would want, you know, in an ideal world. But this was an opportunity that, after thinking about it and after saying no a few times, we realized that why not? This could be something amazing. And it has been.
That's so cool. I never heard that part of your story. Thank you. And I want to come back to this point about what Israelis who don't know the diaspora can learn from communities around the world. But I wonder if you could give us an insight, because you've lived in and been on shluchot in Poland, in Germany, in Estonia. They're all quite different, and each has their own flavor. And maybe you can give us a little bit of an insight into what it's like in each of those places as communities, and where you've perhaps most enjoyed yourself or found things most interesting, to give us a sense of the different cultures and communities.
So I will
It's a big question.
Yeah, it's a big question, but I love it because it also makes me reflect on all these places and what I took with me. And I think I will start with Estonia, which is it's a small Jewish community, but surprisingly active. And one thing I saw there that I haven't seen anywhere else is how involved the community members are. Everything is run by volunteers. People take initiative. They honor their volunteers, and people are so involved in everything. And I haven't seen it in a lot of places. And because in Poland, you often need to bring someone from the outside to lead, to push forward, to teach. And in Estonia, it felt like we are the compost to what they're doing. Like they're doing it amazingly, and we are just there to bring something different. So that's something I loved about Estonia. And in Poland,
I want to add, actually, for those who don't know Estonia, because I did a little bit of work there doing some strategic planning for their community and their school, and I was really blown away. And people don't necessarily know that the Jewish school in Estonia is the most high tech of all the Jewish schools I've been to. They're really innovative, and that's, for me, that was a real flavor that I took from Estonia, as well as this whole Jewish community center and the active sense of their members. But I was only there for a short time.
Yeah, no, for me, I've never seen anything quite like that. And the level of initiatives that they have was unbelievable. And in Poland, which is such a completely different vibe of the people and a different language and a different demographic also of the community, it's much older than the one we've met in Estonia. But what I felt in Poland was, first of all, in general, from the city of Wrocław and the people of Wrocław, is the level of creativity and chutzpah they have in everything that they do. Like everything had a little twist to it, and there was a lot of creativity and like questioning things, which also made me be more creative, because when you're surrounded by that, you're also become that creative. But also I felt that there's a lot of thirst in Poland to learn about Judaism. You meet so many people who come and say, I think I'm Jewish. Where do I start? And it's such a zchut, to be there for people at that point in their life when they are not scared, or they're willing to ask those questions of their family, or they're not scared of, what will people say if I'm Jewish? And I really felt like a rock star, like with the questions people come with, and, every idea I had was able to become something. And you don't meet that often in places. When I imagined Poland, I've never been to Poland until we actually went there as a couple for shlichut, and it was such a different. You imagine the shtetl, but it's absolutely not a shtetl.
And what about Munich now? Is that a different case entirely? I think people would be fascinated to understand about living as a Jew in Germany today, and there is a large Jewish community, particularly in Berlin, and a lot of Israelis. But for many people, it would still be anathema to think that we're strengthening Jewish life back in Germany.
So in Germany, it's also different. It reminds me a lot more of the Great Synagogue in Jerusalem, like in terms of like the mentality and how things work, and how it's a more official kind of Judaism, which is different to the informal Judaism in Poland and the, young grassroots Judaism that you see in Estonia. It's a lot more formal. But it was also, for us, it kind of felt like we're for the first time after a long time living in a normal Jewish community that has everything that it needs to have. And we are members of the community, but we're not working for this community. So it's also a very different experience for us, like, not to be in a community position. And I think it enabled me to really see the variety of Jews that are here. You have people from all over, including the local, like people who were raised and born here, and also a large Russian community, which is a whole melting pot of people. And yeah, I think it's just a very different Jewish community from what we gotten used to. And I think, Dafka, if I look at the broader picture, following October 7th, this is probably the best place we could have been at, because specifically in Munich, they stood next to Israel. they stood next to the Jews, and you saw a lot of solidarity on the street. But also we had an event a few months ago that non-Jews came. There was an anti-Israel demonstration, and it was around the same time as Kabbalat Shabbat, and non-Jews formed a contra demonstration, and they made a human chain around the synagogue during that time of Kabbalat Shabbat. And I remember I was just standing there in tears, seeing some friends that I know and people I know, from different Jewish events, who came and said in these words, not just with their actions, but they said, I will protect the Jewish life in Munich with my body. And you don't see that happening in a lot of places. So it was, it's a whole journey through Europe.
That's so special. I'm so happy to hear that you've had that experience. And, it comes with so much baggage in Germany that it's really a different kind of case. And it's so interesting that they respond that way and that you get so much support. So what about this is a positive experience, but are there other negatives in terms of the work that you're doing? It can't be straightforward. And I'm sure there are, as with any leadership, but particularly this kind of work, obstacles that you have to face to go into a different place and to establish yourself and to work and to try and achieve the goals that you want to achieve and to know whether you've achieved them. Like, tell us something about the complexities.
I think the complexities is finding your path while respecting the community and their traditions and their mentality. Being Israeli, I have my way of doing things, and I can be loud and I talk with my hands. And, we've lived in places where people talk quieter. So there's I think the cultural clash, that's something that we always have to really be aware of in order to be able to do any kind of work. I think the price that as a family we pay is not always an easy one. I think that for me has been the hardest one, especially with, how do we give our children the values that we were raised with? How do I do that to them in a completely different environment? When we worked as a rabbi in Rebbetzin, it was also, how do we separate ourselves from the community sometimes? Because we once had a huge tantrum because apparently, according to my son, Shabbat is not Shabbat if you don't have guests. When we just wanted to spend a family Shabbat, and he said, it's not Shabbat, I'm not playing along with this. So it's a lot of things, how do you separate yourself from the community, but also how do you, if you're having a bad day, you still have to be there for your congregants and for the people you work with and work for. So it's really, because unlike any other job, when you go home and you can unwind, you're kind of on call all the time. And and sometimes things that happen in the community don't match your energy levels or what you were planning to do. And just being a shliach, it means you're there for all things, for a birth of someone, for the burial of someone, for someone's crisis or someone's simcha. I think this for me has been the hardest. And also, and I will also say, like, the language barrier can be really, really hard also to do my work, but also just, to get settled somewhere. You simply don't understand how things work for a long time.
Yeah. Well, you must have a lot of patience and resilience to pick up and then to move to another place and to establish yourself again. What you were saying about the community and how to separate yourself and the demands, in a way, is really the perils of leadership generally. And we've heard, say, from our guest last week, who is a community Rebbetzin, who spoke about providing for and holding a community. But I think in your case, it's on steroids, like it's even more immersive, because you're literally picking yourself up from your own community and going to another country and another culture and really carrying that community and being part of it at the same time. So it's really quite a unique position. And I mean, I think it's incredible what you've managed to do.
I think I will add to that. I recently spoke with a friend who's a shlicha, and they just moved between one shlichut and another. And we both agreed that there's a sense of, I'm here for 2 years or 3 years or 5 years or however long. So I really have to make the community's time worth it. So when you said being on steroids, that really was like, yes, that's exactly that feeling that, I don't have time to waste.
Sense of responsibility. But what about yourself? What about yourself in this? And what about your family in this? Because you've left your own peers back home and your own relatives, and really you're there because of the community. So how do you make sure that you retain your own identity and your own interests and your own life, and also look after your family? You know, you also said that this was the whole family's shlichut. So how did they respond?
So in the beginning, I think now we're used to it. It is a price to pay. We're far away from the family. We're not always there for family simchas, or, you know, when my grandmother passed away during COVID, I was pregnant in another country and I couldn't be there for my family, but also not to honor her the way I wanted to. So you pay prices for the distance. But you also see a lot of opportunities that we wouldn't have had. If we had lived in Israel, we would live in a neighborhood with people who think like us, who look like us, who do everything like us, and it's great. But my children are learning so much about what does it mean to be a Jew that they would never learn in Israel. My son, from a very young age, he referred to himself as the rabbi of the children. My children are very, you know, we have a lot of guests over every Shabbat, and my children can show everyone how to do, and they're used to hosting non-religious, non-Jews. They're used to everything. And for them at their age to be able to articulate what do we do and why do we do things the way we do, I think it's something that they would never get in Israel. You know, we're always wondering when's the right time to come back. And we always said my son's bar mitzvah, but I love how open he is and his decision to wear a kippah, to tell someone he's Jewish. They have very Israeli names. So it's pretty much obvious that they're not German. But I think it shapes their identity, and I love seeing it from the outside, you know, to be there on their journey. But again, I'm going to the positive things of this. I think the distance is the hardest thing, because we learn to live with you know, compromising on some things, that with education that we have to supplement at home, or that we have to create our own path and make our own decisions. You know, I think 31 when I hosted my first Seder. My mother-in-law did this in her 50s. You know, it was a lot of things that we had to create. How does it look like for our home? And I wasn't ready for that. And I think it brought up a lot of questions for me. You know, how would my grandmother do this? How would my baby do this? And there's a lot of sense of I wasn't there, like I couldn't ask them this on time. And I wish I did. And so I think it's more of a family price.
Mm-hmm. You must be very self-assured in your own family, because I think a lot of people wouldn't have the confidence to take their children out of a religious environment and put them somewhere without having that really strong confidence that you can pass on your own traditions to your children. And even, as you said to me when we spoke last, that your children are in the local school. So it's not like you've like the Chabad families will go online to the international school, but you're really immersing them and trusting them.
And I think, but I really think it makes a difference in the community. Because my kids go to the Jewish school here in Munich, which most of the families are not religious, but the level of mutual respect that exists, you know, my children's friends, all three of them, in different ages, they will not have a birthday party on Shabbat because they know that we will not be able to attend. Every single party we've been invited to, there was always kosher food available. It's things that, you know, I got so used to always carrying the little lunchbox, and my kids know that they're not allowed to eat the cake, or they're used to asking. And I think it also creates a great, like, we pay a price, or we felt at the beginning that we're paying a price, but it's also a great impact because people are asking questions, are learning, and it doesn't, like, the fact that we live differently does not mean that we cannot be friends, we cannot come to each other's homes, and we cannot create life together, which is really what I believe in general for Jewish life, that we should all find a way to live together and to make it work. So here I see that it actually is possible.
And what do you think that they, your children and Israelis by extension, are learning from the diaspora? Because I think from you, I get a real sense of cultural sensitivity, and, you know, you're very multilingual, and I appreciate that because that's also an interest of mine. But is that what you would say the Israelis can benefit from seeing different types of Jews, or is there something more?
Absolutely. And I see it also in my Israeli friends here, that, you know, in Israel, they're used to one way of Judaism because maybe they've never been to a synagogue, or they only read about what someone said something in the newspaper. And here they're actually seeing that we can make it work. And that it's like they ask questions that probably they wouldn't ask in Israel, because then it's like, oh, you're about tshuva, and you're changing, you're not the same person. And I think there's, just like we felt that we are able to explore in a way when moving outside of Israel and create our own traditions, I see it also in the Israelis. And we have a lot of Israeli friends of my children that they would come and sleep over by us on Shabbat. And the parents would say, I actually like it when they come to you for Shabbat because they learn, they don't use a phone. And, you know, and we always say you can come pick them up from shul. And then they come and discover there's a kiddush. And it's all of a sudden, it's like Judaism is actually something that's nice. It's a community. It's something that could line up with their values and not with the way they perceive what Judaism can be. And so I think
refreshing that you get to create something different when you're outside of your box and outside of your own bubble, to really think creatively and differently about how you want to co-create your Judaism.
Yeah.
So on this podcast, we focus on women and leadership, and you're an example of that. But I want to start talking with you really about the themes of leadership, and then specifically about women and the future for Jewish women. And I know these are areas that you've thought a lot about and that are passions of yours as well. In terms of leadership, what do you think it takes today to be a leader within a Jewish community setting? You know, particularly as a woman, but really as a leader in general in 2025. You know, we need, I think leadership requires different things in generations. So what is it that you see as really requirements? And perhaps if there's any mentor or somebody that's shaped the way that you're a leader.
So I think also my view of what is leadership has changed, because I always thought a leader is someone who everyone follows. You know, that's how I was raised. What is a leader? And then I went to the army, and leadership is about, you know, how you can keep a straight face and, you know, give orders to people. And it took me a long time to evolve into understanding that leadership really means being really adaptive and to be able to change, and to, you know, if I said something yesterday, then tomorrow or in a year, I could see things differently. I think leadership, especially women, bring a different kind of leadership. And I think also when my younger self looked at male versions of leadership and thought, how can I be more like them? And I love the fact that today there's so many women who I can look up to, and each one of them leads differently. Like, it's okay to be an emotional leader. It's okay to be a vulnerable leader. It's okay to admit your mistake. It's different kinds of leaderships that I love being exposed to. And I'm thinking of so many women who like are mentors and leaders to me, and each one of them has her own strength and the reason why I turn to her. And I don't know if any of them are names that are, you know, they're people who to me hold my heart and, you know, help me get to where I am, but also to envision what's next for me. And I will say,
name drop some examples.
So I'll give one name, who also, it's all coincidences in life, right? So Rabbanit Renana Birnbaum, she's from the Or Torah Stone Amiel Institute, and she was the one who trained the wives of the shlichim. So when we decided to go on shlichut, my husband said, okay, you've been a shlicha many times, I don't know what to do. And then it was a program that was separate for men and women. I think it evolved also in that decade. But she was the first time that I saw a rabbi's wife, and she did shlichut, they did shlichut in a number of places, who really created a role. And because when you're a rabbi's wife, he's the leader, he has a very clear job description and clear expectations. And I was afraid of being the rabbi's wife. It's a job title, the rabbi's wife. And what if I'm a person other than just being married to him? And it was very hard for me. And she really planted seeds in me to take what I'm passionate about and turn that into what I do. and how I lead. And until today, very often I would call her and consult with her, and it could be about professional things, about personal things. She really taught me what it's like to be a Rebbetzin, or a different kind of leader, because in Israel, the Rebbetzin is a different role than what you see outside of Israel. And I never knew that, because there's always the rabbi, but she really taught me what it means to be the rabbi's wife and to be proud of it. And
I think she's taught you well. I really see that you have this sense of authenticity and being real, and I'm sure that that's how your communities have connected to you, and without being intimidating, like to be able to be themselves and to tap into the energy that you have. So yeah, she's taught you well.
Thank you. I'll make and it's also, it's a great opportunity to be able to say it out loud and to really acknowledge what she gave me, because very often we don't see it at the time. But now looking back, I'm like, wow, look how much she did without knowing she did that for me.
So what does that role? What does that role look like in terms of the women's role leading within a community, and how women can contribute to the spiritual life of a community? Because I think for you, you've adapted and you've done different things in different communities, but I'm always looking to try and understand how women can contribute. And that might be because they're married to a rabbi, and it might be because they're not, they might not be married to a rabbi and still have what to contribute to the spiritual life of a community. What can you suggest?
So I think the choice to contribute to the spiritual and communal life, I think that's a hard choice, because it requires being very active and being very attentive, respectful, vulnerable at times, because different communities look differently, and the role of a woman, it can be challenging for some women in an Orthodox Jewish community. I think, first of all, it's to show up and not to give up on Jewish life and on Jewish spirituality. And I think it's also, there's responsibility for the rabbi, for the men, to also create that space to show up. And I've noticed that when we lived in Poland, the mechitza was in the back, and there was like 8 seats for the women. And at some point, I remember I asked my husband, or my husband asked me, and I said, what if we move it a little bit and create more room for women? And we did it without, being too dramatic about it. We just moved the mechitza to make more room for women. And women started showing up. And once they started showing up, all of a sudden, it created this curiosity, I think, to be curious and to be able to ask questions. For me, I'm not a very spiritual person, but how do I connect with my spirituality? Through limud, through, exploring what was done before, different traditions, different rituals. And one of my ways of connecting, which was new to me, was, baking challah, which became a very spiritual thing for me, but also a community building. And I think often we don't hear about, when you read the Gemara, and there's very few women who are mentioned there. But they did do a lot, because it got us to where we are today. And I think through those things that many women will say, but I can't, or there's no room, or I'm not allowed. There's still so much that we can do, because that really makes such an impact on what community looks like, what Jewish life looks like, and so on. So for me, it was mostly through limud and food, which is a great way to combine.
Right, you're a Jewish educator at heart, and a really creative one. So I wonder how you work out what kind of approach to Jewish education you take for the different kinds of communities that you're in. Like developing new materials, working out how much to push people, how much people want, developing things that people are engaged with. Like, I'm in the business of Jewish education as well, and we're constantly trying to think about new and exciting and creative courses, but you need to meet people where they are.
Yeah, and I think definitely when you bring something from a place of curiosity and sharing, you can say a lot more things that you would think that are, maybe you think, oh, maybe it's controversial, but when you come from a place of, I'm open to hear what you have to say about it. And one thing that I always used to say when I gave talks in Poland was that all questions are kosher. And don't be afraid. There's nothing you can ask that is wrong. Like, maybe I will prefer to answer you later. Maybe I don't know, but all the questions are welcomed. And I think with that attitude, you can really say, pretty much anything. I was very privileged that, in Estonian, in Russian, Polish, not all the texts that are available to me as a Hebrew speaker and available to us as English speakers are available in Polish or in Estonian or in Russian. So it was really bringing something in that they've never heard of, some things that for us maybe we were taught when we were younger. So it was really exciting to see how they react to things. And I think that's also what brought food into my life as an educational tool, because I didn't grow up in a very culinary home, to be honest. We had a lot of packaged food from my grandparents. And when we moved to Poland, I had to start cooking everything from scratch, and I hated it. And I thought, if I have to do it, let's do it together. And there's so many things that I could teach through just cooking together, about halakha, about kashrut, about Jewish life, about, even different traditions, like, in Purim, when you make the eyes of Haman challah, and different things that, it sounds terrible when you say, like, we made the eyes of Haman, and like but you can say so many things and do so, because food is a great bridge. And I think for me, that was a great way to really not be afraid of messing up and scaring people away. And
totally, I love that. I want to share a couple of things, because you've reminded me about so many important things in my own journey, and one of them is the year that I spent in Chile in South America. And I know you have Latin American roots as well, but for me, I spent a lot of time with the community, and particularly with a family for whom food was really, really central, and Jewish food, and bringing people into their home. And it was unbelievable, the impact when you see how food can bring people together and connect people, Jewish people from around the world. It became this kind of hub. And I really, it's really big. It's a really central part of my memories of that year, and a year that I became closer to my Judaism through food and also through learning. And the other thing I really wanted to highlight was when you're talking about questions, because the importance of encouraging questioning is so Jewish. And it reminded me, this week, a story was quoted at a beautiful event I was at in memory of Rabbi Sachs. So they quoted one of my teachers, Maureen Kendler, Zichrona Levracha, who was also, she used to work at LSJS. She was an amazing educator, and she brought a story from the Gemara about a man who had this really burning question, and he was desperate to ask his Rebbe, who lived many, many miles away and had to travel many miles to another village. And people say, why would you go? And, why is it so important? And he went all the way with his questions. He visited this Rebbe, and the Rebbe turned around to him and he asked the question. The Rebbe turned around to him and said, that's a great question. Why would you spoil it with an answer? So it really made me laugh, because when you were talking about questions, at the end of the day, if you can encourage people within an educational framework just to ask questions and to be curious about their Judaism, then I think that's success in itself.
Yeah. Thank you for sharing that story with me. I love it.
I hadn't heard it for a long time, and I was pleased that it was actually Danielle, the ambassador, who shared it at an event this week. So let's think about the future and your vision for women and Jewish leadership. I always challenge my guests, and particularly I'd like to hear from you. When you look ahead 20 years, what do you hope for the experience of Orthodox women, whether it's as leaders, as educators, as role models, and for all of us as Jewish women? What do you think the landscape's going to be like?
First of all, I'm very curious to see what this landscape would be like. Because for me, one moment that almost broke me was when I was, I don't know, maybe 10, 11, 12. And my grandfather said, you belong in the women's gallery. And that broke my heart, because it took me many years to not see what I'm not allowed to do. And I really, I would say that, how do I say it? That to not see all the no's, to really look for opportunities, to be curious. That's what I wish, for a young someone who's just starting out and asking herself, can I do this? Yes, you can. And because I never thought that, I would be able to do what I'm doing, that I would be, I never thought of this as an option. And in leadership, especially, the way leadership is perceived is changing. What is a leader? Today, so you could pick up your phone and be a leader of more people than, some rabbis in small communities, like you could really make a difference. And I think for women, very often we like there's the imposter syndrome and there's a lot of doubt, am I doing the right thing? Or so I hope I'm answering your question properly. But not to look at what's not allowed. I really wish for women to be able to be vulnerable enough and brave enough to potentially fail, but to potentially succeed and do something really, really big. Because I missed as a young, woman to see role models that I can look up to. And today I'm looking, to my left and right, I see amazing women to learn from, to grow with, to learn with. I wish for them that this will continue, like that everything that's happening will just be, that the possibilities that I see as endless today will be even, more unimaginable from what I can imagine today.
I love that answer. You totally have answered my question in a beautiful way. And you have such a can-do attitude, and you're absolutely right that that's how we make things happen. That you're a great role model in that regard. And I think this point about your phones and that really goes to show that leadership has become so democratized, which gives us so many opportunities. And it's for all of us to find those opportunities and to run with them. And thank you for referring to the Women's Gallery, because that is, after all, the name of this podcast, with a small dose of irony. So hopefully we're opening that up between us all. Thank you so much, Danielle, for joining me on Women's Gallery today. It's been a real joy to have this conversation. I've enjoyed it so much. And I want to say thank you to all of our listeners. Thank you for listening. Please do share the podcast with anyone you think would appreciate it. Send in your feedback, send in your suggestions for role models that you have that you'd like me to interview. And follow me and LSJS on Facebook, looking out for all our upcoming learning opportunities. I wanted to flag up 2 that are coming up just this week. For those who still would like to sign up, we have an excellent family tour of the British Museum this Sunday, the 7th of December, with Rafi Cohen, looking at Hanukkah themes. And this Thursday, the 4th of December, we're going to be starting a new course in building Gemara skills, looking at Sanhedrin with the wonderful Rabbinit Surila Rosen. So those are just a couple of my recommendations from our program, which you can find online at www.lsjs.ac.uk. Thank you so much.